welcome to This is Recruiting and welcome to this webinar on how to boost your post-offer candidate engagement. I'm Rebecca. I will be your host today and I work at Hackerearth here. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, This is Recruiting is a webinar series that we started here at Hackerearth to bring together the best in the industry of HR, of talent, acquisition, recruiting, sourcing, the whole shebang, to come in and give their insights on important challenges that they face, the stories that they have on their journey so far, and of course, the problems that most of you are facing right now, which is why we have this entire topic in the first place. For those of you who are new to Hackerearth, or if you've heard us for the first time, we are a tech recruiting platform that basically acts like a matchmaker for developers and technical recruiters. So what we do is we help you with your entire hiring life cycle, from sourcing to interviewing and engagement as well. So if you'd like to know more about our platform, if you'd like to hear more about the incredible stuff we do with tech recruiters and engineering managers, you can visit hackerearth.com/recruit and sign up for a demo. So, I don't want to take up too much time talking about us because this webinar is all about our special guest for today, one of the most fun people I've met so far. So welcome, Robin. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for taking out the time today, to talk about such an important challenge that I think a lot of recruiters are facing today. We had actually released a poll on one of our earlier webinars on, what are the topics that our audience would like to see. And I think this was right there with the top, continuously asking about what is the kind of engagement that recruiters need to do with their candidates, especially post the Great Resignation. So welcome, Robin. And why don't you give us a little bit of introduction about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca. I'm so looking forward to this, and I second your comment about getting folks to kind of chime into the chat and kind of really make it a discussion, because I think that's how we collectively learn, is when we talk with each other, I guess. But I am a little bit about me, a long time HR and recruiting practitioner, independent of various titles or industries I've worked in. I still always wear that mantle of being a practitioner, and really in there doing the work and kind of trying to do the work better. So I've been an in-house recruiter, an in-house recruiting leader. I have been an in-house HR business partner. I've been VP of HR and director roles and things like that, in a variety of industries. So I have crossed the realm from companies with 25 employees to global organizations with 30,000. So I've really kind of touched it all. And the last several years working for Peridus Group. So we are an HR consulting firm. We do a lot of work with HR technology, as well as assessments for HR teams and HR leaders on their capabilities, their strengths, and where they have opportunities for improvement. So I've worked in this field for a long time, and I never get tired of talking about it or finding new ways to do things.
And for those of you, I'm pretty sure most of our audience here is very familiar with DriveThruHR. So if you're a regular listener there, just like all of us here at Hackerearth, you've probably already heard Robin and her insights and, the various topics that they cover here. We were just lucky enough to steal a few minutes to get her on our webinar for once too.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, yes, DriveThruHR has been on the air since before podcasts were called podcasts. So since 2010, and I've been one of the co-hosts for the last 4 years. So we've gone through various co-hosts, and it sort of follows the same thought process that I really put out there, which is just getting guests and getting folks online to talk about what we deal with day in and day out in the people business.
Right. And I think, the insights you have there, plus, whatever we are going to be talking and covering here today, I'm sure it's going to be invaluable. I can already see, the comments coming in about people who have listened to you in the past. I'm pretty sure we have a lot of your groupies and fans here.
Excellent.
So let's get started with the actual topic today.
Yeah, let's and when we talked about getting together and doing this, I totally understand why this was a hot topic request and why it's very front of mind for people. I hope that we can, kind of dive into some ideas and some different ways of thinking, because that time from offer acceptance to start date is just this perilous journey for so many people, and it's kind of fraught with danger. And I used the term the other week when I was talking about it. It's like the forest of uncertainty. And I picture our candidates as our quote new hires, really, as they're like Hansel and Gretel, and they're walking through this dark forest, and they're leaving breadcrumbs for themselves, because they're kind of thinking, well, what if I need to find my way back to where I'm coming from? And so when we think about that time frame, that offer acceptance to start date, it's a very challenging time, because our candidates, they're excited. They get the job offer. Maybe they've negotiated. We, give them the salary that they're looking for, and benefits. Maybe we've negotiated additional PTO time or something, and so they have this sense of excitement. And we on the TA team are thinking, wow, they can't wait to start. And so we kind of do all these steps, and they give their 2-week notice. Maybe they take off a week to refresh and get their mindset before they start. So we're often looking at about 3 weeks from offer acceptance to potential start date. And a lot can happen in those 3 weeks. The threat of the counter offer always looms. We like to think it doesn't, but it certainly does. But we also need to remember that this person that we just hired, this hot talent that we're bringing on board, they have been interviewing elsewhere. And they may, in fact, be continuing to interview. We've given them an offer. They've accepted it. But they have had other irons in the fire. So they're still in job search and interviewing mode. And just because they've accepted our offer doesn't mean that they necessarily stop those activities. And, they may be continuing that in that 3-week period. That thought of starting a new job is, or actually starting a new job has often been cited as one of the top, most stressful times in life. It's right up there with getting married and buying a house and things of that nature. So it's a stressful time for people. And so they're starting to think about, what does this mean? And so again, the visual I have is walking through the forest and thinking, what if I need to go back? What if I've accepted this job with Acme Corporation, and have I made the right decision? And they're thinking that in that 3-week time frame, and that's something we always need to be mindful of, and especially now when there's a hot job market for folks. So it's a good conversation, and so we can. There's my little preamble to it, but we could totally dive into the questions.
Yeah, so I think, just following off that, like you said, one of the first things that people are looking for, they're leaving those breadcrumbs. And just building off on that analogy, where is the house, that's made of candy, the pre-onboarding kit or, the post-offer kit that a recruiter can give one of these candidates to just lure them in completely, make sure that they don't have those breadcrumbs come right into our house. We won't eat you though.
Right. And I think when we think about it, and I'm probably going to end up using some of these terms interchangeably because it's pre-boarding, pre-onboarding, onboarding, post-offer, it's kind of that they're kind of used interchangeably. And I think when we think of it as a kit, right? It's what am I going to be providing people with? And there's really sort of two basic components, I think, to that pre-boarding step. There's the must do, the compliance stuff, which is the most unexciting, unsexy, but we have to do it piece, right? So there's the compliance piece, and then there are the activities and the steps that we take to create connections and to build that cultural affinity for somebody new coming in. So there's really those two very general buckets that we're looking at. And, the reality is we're never going to get away, obviously, from that compliance part of pre-boarding. It's the tax forms and it's the background checks and, new hires are signing handbooks and policies. The more that we use technology and love it, right? I'm old enough to remember when all this was paper and a fax machine. But, we think about all of the integrations that we use within our systems that we often have automated, which is wonderful, right? But it's what are those compliance steps in that onboarding process, and how do they flow one after the other? So I've signed my offer letter, and that kicks off. Okay, now the company's system is going out, and it's automatically setting up a login to the third-party vendor where I do my background check and I get my drug screen scheduled. And so there are these workflows that start to happen, and we absolutely need to use these from an efficiency standpoint and a process standpoint. But it all becomes very kind of overwhelming, and people are used to it. I think by now, but it's lengthy, right? So it's this compliance stuff, right. And it's okay. You've done your background check. Now you need to go to this third-party website, and you're in the U.S., so you have to go do an I-9. So fill out your I-9. Now you have to go to a third party to verify your ID because you're working remote. So all of these steps, and so really the key, I think, with that. Thinking about that part of the kit, that compliance piece, is to make it ensure that it's as painless as possible. And so a top tip really when looking at that part of the kit is to regularly, as a recruiter, as the HR operations owner, perhaps, of onboarding, is to put yourself through your own onboarding process. It's really the same advice that, we, as recruiters, we kind of tell each other to, hey, regularly go out and apply for a job with your own company and see what that's like. regularly go through the onboarding process as if you were a new hire with your company and see what that's like. I recently was working with a client, and small, mid-sized business, so not, tens of thousands of employees, and they had, several years ago, not even several, more than several years ago, had automated most pieces of their onboarding, of their pre-boarding process. And so new hires were getting these compliance things done online. However, no one in the HR team had gone through the process in years and had not checked it in years. So when I went in to work with them, I said, look, fresh set of eyes, pretend you're hired, do everything short of putting me on payroll, but pretend you're hiring me. I'm going to apply for a job so I can check what it's like as an applicant. And then I want you to hire me and take me through that entire process. So we did everything short of putting me on payroll, but it was the greatest way to discover where those pain points were just in that very basic workflow. So that compliance piece, it's a necessary evil. We have to do it. But we need to regularly check on it. What's the language we're using? We might have things automated. We've got templates. But one of the diseases that we have often in HR is we write things. We write a letter, a policy, a memo, a message, whatever. And we are so involved in it. We know what it means. And we don't double check with representatives from our intended audience. Is this clear to you? Does this make sense? Is this short, sweet? Is it engaging? So looking at those communication pieces, I think, is also key, is also critical. And then the other aspect of that kit is really the activities and the items and the interactions that are focused on connecting people to the organization and connecting people to each other. So there's the compliance bucket, the necessary evil, got to get this stuff done, want this person getting the information they need and vice versa. But the bigger piece, which is really in many ways more critical, is how are we at this stage in this critical 2 to 3 week period connecting that person to the organization and to the people that they'll be working with.
Right. So I think building off of that itself, how do we connect them and create that timeline? What do we include? When do you send them the things that relate to only compliance? And when are we talking, lighter things that they might enjoy or, give a little taste of what's happening in the company?
Yeah. Well, and I think part of this planning for this and mapping out that workflow is important. And again, it's working in conjunction with whatever HR technology we're using at the same time. I think an overarching theme to either building the timeline and or then actually doing the pre-boarding is to remember that it's a shared responsibility. There are multiple people who need to play a role in this critical time, in this process. It's the recruiter, it's HR team members, and it's the hiring manager. So it's this three-legged stool, and everybody needs to be working together. And oftentimes I think it ends up becoming an unsatisfactory process for that new hire because there's this ineffective handoff between these three parties. So I think the first thing to remember is, when looking at a timeline, is thinking about what is this seamless experience that we want to build. And in a smaller organization, it's sometimes easier, right? Because there's potentially one person in a small organization who's the recruiter and also owns onboarding, perhaps. So it can certainly be built and managed perhaps a little more seamlessly. But in a large organization, a large enterprise, we often have these stop and start workflows. And so mapping that out, it truly does become important, because we think of this stop start process, right? Where as often the recruiter may, makes the offer, generates the offer letter, and really kind of handles it up through acceptance. Person's accepted the offer. Then that recruiter hands it off to someone in HR. And so suddenly we have this new person or people who are taking over the communication and follow-up. So looking at that part of the workflow, how are we doing that handoff? Are we communicating that clearly? Does that person who's just accepted the offer know what's coming? How transparent can you be, should you be with that? And what are your communication pieces around that? But so that new hire has been handed off to someone in HR. Great, people get that, people understand that, but sometimes that new hire is still really only familiar with, they've bonded with the recruiter, right? This is the recruiter is the person who has shepherded them through this process. And so they, I found that new hires will often continue to reach out to the recruiter even once the recruiter has passed it on. And so when someone's working as a recruiter, it's often a challenge to find the time or to remember to have the time to kind of be involved still in that timeline with that new hire, because quite often, right? Oh, I've published that requisition. Here we go. It's been handed off to HR. Now I'm going to look at these other 35 requisitions that I've got open and focus on those. And I could tell an example actually within the last couple of weeks. A friend of mine who works in tech, hot prospect, right? Decided to kind of put themselves out there, start looking for a new position. As soon as they opened the floodgates and said, I'm ready, lots of interviews, quick, lots of interviews within 3 days of each other, had 2 job offers. Our dream, right? We, as individuals, I wish I had 2 job offers to balance, but they truly were looking at them and saying, which one, and very thoughtful, and made a decision had accepted job number 1. Job number 2 offer came in, kind of weighed them both and said, I think I'm going to go with job number 2. Okay. And at that stage, the only contact they had at company 1 was the recruiter. And they had obviously talked to the hiring manager and whatnot, but the recruiter was their person. And so they reached out to the recruiter and said, hey, can you give me a call? This is 3 days after they had signed the offer acceptance letter. And that recruiter did not contact them for several days.
Oh,
and
wow.
By the time they finally did, because that recruiter, and I get it, that recruiter though had moved on to, wait, I've handed that off to HR. Why are they still contacting me? And so this person's declining of that offer was delayed in the company getting it. So I know it's a lot for recruiters to have on their plate, but that's kind of part of the timeline, is thinking through that handoff and what needs to happen. So that's kind of high level picture, but, I think the things to consider when building that timeline is, and this is going to be very unique to each organization, right? But think about a typical, 2-week, let's pick a 2-week notice period. And you almost kind of start, you build it from both sides. Here's day one. What do we want done by day one? And, where do we start post offer? So I like to kind of map things out. And again, the beauty is if I've got my systems that I can automate for this, obviously is a whole lot easier as long as I'm checking those, paying attention to it. And that might be, it's seeing how do my systems work? To what degree am I still messaging them through my ATS? When do things flow over to my, HRIS or an onboarding platform if I have a, specific onboarding platform? So it is taking a look at the integrations between these different platforms, but building out that timeline, sort of on days. So maybe what I might do is day one, post offer, I'm going to send out a survey to the new hire, right? So maybe day one. And in addition, yes, all this compliance stuff is going on perhaps, but from a human standpoint, I'm going to do these other things.
Right.
Survey, post offer candidate survey, right? Get the person to give some feedback. Connect with them on LinkedIn. If here's a human. If I'm the recruiter and I haven't connected, because some recruiters don't do this, but if I have not somehow connected with that new hire on LinkedIn, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to ask the manager and or other members of the hiring team, hey, Bob's accepted the job. Here's your task to do. Connect with them on LinkedIn, hiring manager, members of the team, whatever. Give that hiring manager an invite template that they can cut and paste to, hey, Bob, glad you're joining us. Let's connect on LinkedIn, whatever. Day 3, post offer. So I'm in that critical time frame, right? But it's day 3, post offer. I might set up, make sure this is scheduled. This is part of my workflow. There's a brief welcome call with their new manager. It could be 15 minutes, right? But what often happens in that 2 to 3 week period, again, is that, Bob's been hired for the job and he's getting all these tasks done, but he does not hear from his new manager at all. And that new manager is critical in that process. And so getting those managers involved, again, it's that 3-legged stool, right? But so day 3, here's a quick, we're putting it on your calendar, 15-minute welcome call from your manager. During that call, you might use that opportunity to see, is this new hire, Bob, the new hire, available for a get to know you lunch or meeting or, Zoom call if everybody's remote, or, if we're all in person and in town. Hey, do you have any time in these next couple of weeks? A couple of members of the team would love to meet you for lunch, type of thing. So kind of find out if there are any moments in that timeline. Depends on the company and the work. Are you remote or are you in person altogether somewhere? But set up a face-to-face sort of meeting, perhaps with other team members. Think about the need. Again, varies. If we're remote, it's different. But days 5 through 8, I might set up an office tour if the person, for some reason, didn't have an office tour. Day 7, maybe that's when I ship out company swag. So I've kind of got this all on a timeline. Hey, it's day 7 post offer. That's the day that this box of a koozie and a sweatshirt and a notepad goes out. And we love that because who doesn't see that on LinkedIn, right? People say, oh, I got a new job. Here's my bag of swag. And then think about in that bag of swag, Is there something, depends on your budget and your company and whatever, but I've seen some companies include things for the family as well. Here's a, this becomes then you kind of know the person personally, right? But, I know you have kids. Here's a onesie with our logo on it, or something for your partner, whatever it may be. So think about if that fits your culture, fits your ethos, fits your budget. Think about including the family in that as well. And then, day 10, kind of the last day or two before start date, a final check-in. Again, get this in-person check-in, get this calendarized, whether that's a phone call, a text message, even just an email. But again, not something, automated, but that doesn't look automated, so that it is truly, it's calendarized. Somebody knows who to do it. It's the hiring manager. It's the recruiter doing a last final check-in. It's the person in HR, but really kind of work out those touch points along that schedule. Automate as much as you can, put things on the calendar, make it as easy to administer as possible, but find ways to connect with that person as a person. And then we get to the date of hire, which, we often think should be, sunshine and roses. And the sad thing is it's often not. And we sometimes forget to schedule things on day one. And I've seen this in the virtual world as more people went to virtual work. That day one, where somebody is sitting at home saying, I don't yet have access to anything, and they're sitting in front of a blank monitor because they can't get into anything because they haven't gotten anything yet. They don't know, they don't have no meetings scheduled, and they don't quite know what to do. So that's, I think we're getting better. Collectively, we're getting better at that. But that's still a challenge that I've seen play out here recently with a friend of mine who started virtually. But I think, there's still a lot of folks that do in-person day ones. And those are often a cluster as well, quite often. I have a friend who works in HR, actually, who she once started a job. She reported for day one. This was at the time, about 20,000 employee company. So she reported for day one, was told, yep, report for day one, come to the lobby, ask for your manager, and they'll get you going. And so she arrived, she waited in the lobby for about 30 minutes before someone finally came out and said, oh, the manager's not here today, but come with me and I'll put you in a conference room. Put her in a conference room. And she proceeded to sit in that conference room for 3 hours until someone, remembered that she was there. And again, she worked in HR. And so she was experiencing what that HR onboarding process was like. It's not unusual to probably point out that she lasted there about 6 months before she went on to something else. So day one really kind of gave her a sense of their timelines.
So just to take a quick detour from this, I think we have a couple of questions coming in, from Nicole. One thing, about, like you mentioned with, the coordination and the mapping, she said, that's what I'm experiencing, big organization with a lot of people. How do you facilitate mapping that out with so many parties?
Yeah.
And same thing with the automating, with a large organization, do you just put someone in charge, or is there, another way to make sure this all pulled through?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I've seen over the last several years is large organizations are actually, have actually added a position, a department even, or a position within HR or sitting adjacent to HR, where folks are, quote, onboarding specialists. And they are solely dedicated to, it's not an afterthought for, Trixie, the HR business partner, to do onboarding. If they're a large organization with a large HR team and function, creating an actual department and or several people who may float up into an employee engagement sort of function, because that's really what it is. It's the employee experience, right? So having dedicated onboarding specialists, somebody who owns it, I think is very helpful. Now that's very easy to say, right? Just add some positions. In the reality is, when we work for large organizations and we've got all these hands in the pot and this region and that region and this country and that country, it is finding out, okay, who owns it, who in HR owns onboarding. Somebody is ultimately responsible. It's the VP of HR operations or whatever. Somebody owns it. And so whatever that subset of HR is the functional area of HR that needs to drive these changes and take a look at everything from how are we using our systems, how are we automating, but where are the accountabilities and how do we, it's kind of it's a cross-functional project team that's not a one and done. We're going to come in and solve this problem. It's an ongoing, sort of a metric to track and, set up some metrics around it. What does our onboarding process look like? How do we measure the success of it? Whatever that may be. But it's first saying, this is important. Where is it housed? Where should it be housed? And getting that responsibility on the HR side, right? Even though it's a shared responsibility, let's face it, HR is the architect often and the owner of this. So we need to figure that out first and have somebody say, yeah, this is mine. I'm going to do it.
I hope that answers your question, Nicole. Just moving on from that, I think we're on the same line, like you discussed, right? Talking about leveraging existing employees to engage new candidates. You had mentioned, the calling, the having lunch, the in-person meet, or, even the calendar invite, setting up a couple of meetings and stuff. But, are there other ways to do so? Because I personally, when I was being onboarded, I had a buddy who made the entire transition period super smooth for me. So we had I had an assigned person. Already, because my buddy had told
Oop, Rebecca, you're freezing. I don't know if you're just freezing on me or on everyone. I think she's there. Okay, Nicole says she's freezing for us too. So I'm just going to dive right in and talk about that. I think that that buddy system, that's like old school, and sometimes old school is still the best school. And because it's getting that person again connected with somebody who can show them the ropes, if you will. It makes them feel welcome. They've got a built-in person to go to. The old school way, right, is here's my buddy. I can ask where the bathroom is or the coffee pot or where do I park or where do you go for lunch? But in the, the way we work now, right, and remote, it's still critical, and it's still so valuable, I think, to say, yeah, here's your manager and your teammates and your whatever, but we're gonna, Susie over here is going to be your buddy, and Susie's in a totally different part of the company. So you're starting to also get that sort of cross-functional introduction for that new hire. So I might work in, systems engineering or something, and my buddy is over in accounting or whatever, So I think it's a really valuable way, and we can set up. There's one app I know that a lot of remote companies use. I'm going to forget what it's called. I want to say Donut, where you could just do some random. Let's take folks, and there's a Slack plugin for it. And hey, we're going to do these little meet and greet, get to know each other sort of things, and get together over coffee or a donut type of thing. So that's using existing people to connect to new hires, I think is so valuable. And so what are the creative ways you can do that? That makes sense, again, for your company and your work style. Remote's different than we're all in person, but use existing people.
That's awesome to know. I think one thing that we didn't notice, apart from just asking people whether they're being engaged enough, or whether we should have someone help them out. Another thing which recruiters have pointed out is the channels of actually engaging with them. It's not just it's not like you're beating a dead horse. If they're not responding over email or text, you need to find another way. Like you said, engage with them on LinkedIn, connect with them there, make the hiring manager send out, a connection request. Maybe they'd respond there. So what are the kind of channels that have worked for you before? Because I think I've heard a lot about email and text, and there are differing opinions there. Some people think that doesn't work. Some people think, you need to meet in person, like you said.
Yeah. I think it's, I have, for me personally, it has varied by the company, by the types of positions, by the pace of hiring and the pace of the company. There's so many factors, so it's really thinking about what works best. And I think part of this is gathering this data, right? So if I really want to build this first-class superstar onboarding process, pre-boarding and onboarding process in my company, I'm going to be gathering data, right? And so part of that's going to come from those new hire surveys I did, post-hire, post-day one. I will probably do another survey because I want to know how their onboarding experience went. These don't have to be long. These can be 5 to 10 questions, right? But I'm gathering that data because I'm only going to use that to find ways to improve. So I think finding out what channel works is, I may have a thought of what works, but I'm going to ask my employees and my new hires and my candidates what works for them. So I've worked at very high volume, high turnover organizations. I worked in the casino industry for a couple of different companies, and that was very high volume, 24/7, lots of hires, people come and going we were interviewing on weekends, interviewing at night, onboarding, at all times. And so our best way to our best channel for engagement with those folks was text and or phone call. They didn't read their email. Nobody was on Slack or anything. These were rapid hires. But when we got somebody, and they had a lot of stuff to do before they could walk in the door and work on the casino floor. But we were in constant communication with those folks through that pre-boarding process, and it was text and it was phone calls. When I've worked in different industries where, we're still hiring people, maybe not quite that high volume, but these are folks who are scheduled for meetings all day. They're not going to pick up a phone. They are annoyed at a text message. They like email or a message, maybe even via, a portal somewhere. So it's knowing your candidates, it's knowing your hires, and you know that when you ask them.
I think that makes like perfect sense because here actually at Hackerearth, like I had mentioned before, so since we are a tech recruiting platform and we deal a lot with tech recruiters itself, what we do is we often, engage tech recruiters by asking them what would be the best way for them to constantly stay engaged, and which is why we have an entire product for the same thing. We actually have hackathons, which we conduct for tech recruiters who come in and stay with they attend the particular hackathon or event, solve for a problem statement, meet people there, form a team there, and we found that to be like a super engaging activity. I'm just gonna quickly put that in the chat box, in case anyone would like to check out hackathons itself as a particular way to engage your tech recruiters. But apart from that, I think Laurie has asked us a question. When you have like an older audience and older employees, especially in things like the construction industry, how do you engage them if they're not so tech savvy?
Laurie, been there. You're singing my song because that was certainly one of the challenges that we had at this most recent casino I worked at that I mentioned, where high volume and our candidates and our new hires ranged from I'm 21 years old and I live on every channel and I'm just using technology to folks that were 60, 70 plus coming into work part-time maybe, and, barely had an email address. I mean, we ranged. And so that's where, again, that in that group, that constant communication and that pre-boarding and that onboarding, it was phone calls. It was old school phone calls. It was, most of them were texting, although I did have a fair number of candidates and or employees who did not even have text messaging enabled on their phones. And I know people always say, oh, come on, but it's true. And so that it was phone calls. And so we had these touch points through that pre-boarding and onboarding process. And if it was not an email, it was a phone call. And so I see that being very similar. Folks in the trades, folks in construction, who are not sitting at a desk. They're out working. They're just waiting to come join you. It's a phone call.
I hope that answers your question, Laurie. I think, there's no way around it. You can't go back to things like handwritten letters anymore. You'll have to go to phone calls, or I think actually even the older audience right now, even older employees do have phones. They will respond to texts, or even I'm pretty sure a lot of them have smartphones as well. So moving on to our next question, and this is, I think, everyone here is hoping that they wouldn't have to do all the engagement, that there's some sort of line that you don't need to cross, maybe don't put in that much effort. But, how much engagement is too engagement? Can there be a point where you are suffocating someone like a candidate? Are they feeling overwhelmed with the amount of information that they need to take in?
Yeah, I think there is. Or there can be. And it's going to vary person to person, right? Some people are just like, leave me alone. I don't want to talk to anybody. Just let me do my thing. So yeah, I think there is. And I think this is where sort of that trial and error, those surveys that I'm doing, post offer and then post hire, post day one, those surveys are going to give me feedback. I'm going to, as I said, sort of test my process a couple times a year, tend to hire myself, see what it feels like, looks like. And so I think, it is saying, our goal is not to overload them with these touch points every day, but over, let's say again, this, 2-week period, I'm going to aim, as I'm building that timeline, I'm going to aim for 3 to 4 touches. Independent of maybe some of these automated things that are going, right? Here, go do your drug screen, whatever. I'm going to aim for about 3 to 4 touches. So every several days, that day one, hey, welcome, here's our post-offer survey, please do that. A little later that week, I'm, here's this call with the hiring manager. The next week, hey, maybe there's lunch with the team. And then that final check-in on day 9, day 10, right before they start. So I'm going to aim for, probably 3 to 4 of those kind of personalized touches. And then another thing to think about, and again, this depends upon company, culture, company mandates, rules, perhaps from the IT department. This can also depend upon here in the U.S., which state you're in, because California, as an example, any pre-boarding work that a person has to do needs to be compensated. So there are companies that will wait to do all of those, do your I-9, do your this, do your that until day one when the person's on payroll. But if you have these things that you can do and think about, can you let that new hire into your systems? So this is kind of like, depends on your IT rules or whatever. So at my organization and at Peridus Group, we have about 30 employees. And so we're fairly small, not a lot of bureaucracy, right? So I have a new hire starting next week, next Monday. And so earlier this week, over the weekend, I set up his email. So it's a week before he starts, but I set up his email and I sent him some things over the weekend and say, hey, we're setting up your email. We want to start getting some things in your calendar. We're getting you set up before he starts on Slack and some other channels. And so before he even walks in the door, we will have collectively as a group brought him into, not the business, not doing work, but into kind of the social channels and say, hey, here he is. He's starting next Monday. Everybody welcome him. And we start that connection. We're 100% remote. So this is all done remotely, but think about systems and how you can maybe integrate them into your channels. And then some of these touch points, some of this engagement during this period could happen that way as well.
The main questions that we had to cover, and I already see a bunch of questions rolling in the chat. I think one common thing is how do you plan for outreach and engagement for employees that starts 6 weeks or 2 to 3 months?
Yep.
I think this is both ways here right now, both the questions, same thing, for a longer engagement period. What do you do?
Yeah. And I was just talking to somebody earlier this week about, and I never realized it, that was the norm in India, is that really long period. I've never hired anybody in India, so I did not know that. I think it's a challenge because you're still kind of like, oh my gosh, they could leave, change their mind, whatever. So I think you take that, you build that same concept of a timeline, and you're just extending it out a little bit. And so you're seeing, again, it's not so much here's tasks, but how am I going to keep that human engagement going? And then assigning that to somebody, can that recruiter, again, that's who they really formed a relationship. Can that recruiter stay in touch with, have the recruiter puts it on their calendar to send hey, thinking about you, Bob, know you're starting in a month. Can't wait to see you, whatever. That hiring manager should be, regularly doing a quick little check-in. Even if they're not starting, can you start inviting them to company events? Again, this is going to be dependent upon your company, the culture, what your business is, whatever. But are there meetings, especially for virtual meetings, right? We have an all hands meeting the third Thursday of every month. Can that new hire come to that? They may not be starting for another month, but if there's not information, that's being shared, that's proprietary or whatever, that the person shouldn't have access to, can they start coming to that? And you're starting to bring them into the organization. And again, depends on the size, right? But I was not that long ago worked with a mid-sized company that did virtual all hands meetings. And there were some people in person, but the vast majority of people were calling in and on Zoom. And new hires who were like scheduled to start in the next week or two were invited to come to that. And they were, even though they hadn't started yet, they were introduced. There was a slide about them. It was a smaller company, right? 100 or so employees. So they were able to say, hey, here's Bob. He's starting 2 weeks from now. Here's his position. He's on the meeting today. Everybody say hi to Bob. And so if you can do those sorts of things in that longer period of time, I think that's a good way to do it too. Keep them engaged, bring them in, send them company updates if you can, newsletters, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, especially, being in the marketing team, sending out newsletters and stuff, especially to potential candidates.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure can make a huge difference in terms of, keeping them abreast of what's going on, what are the events that are happening, or even, like you said, I don't think there are any policies that would, forbid, like say a hiring manager taking you to lunch. Maybe like an informal team lunch, and just to get to know everyone in the team at least. That's also probably a good indication that, candidate will be joining soon enough. Just opening out for questions again. If anyone has any questions, please enter them in the Q&A panel there or in the chat box. I have another question that's come personally to me, I think only to the host here. In terms of automating the processes that are there, what automation tool would you choose? I think, this is kind of something that's probably in the US region. Do you have any sort of scheduling tool, or I'm guessing project management tool that could make it easier?
Yeah, I think you could use that. I think really, quite frankly, most of our HR systems, ATS, onboarding system, our, HR systems, whatever. I find that a lot of times we're not using them to their full capabilities. So I would say the first thing to do is look at what are the systems we currently use, and where are we interacting with candidates, new hires, et cetera, for this process. And are we using the automation that's already available to us? As an example, I know in Workday, as we do a lot of work in Workday, you can set up these workflows that are just, and most HR systems are going to do this, right? So, when this step is done, then it will trigger that. And so as you're kind of mapping out your processes anyway, it's looking at, is every aspect of that process fitting in on that workflow, on that timeline? And, or is it just the HRIS team that's kind of doing this? Well, if I'm a recruiter, or I'm a HR ops person, or I'm an onboarding specialist, I want to be to quote the song, in the room where it happens, and be part of those conversations of where does this candidate messaging fit in. And so look internally at whatever systems you're using, and then see if there are plugins or other content messaging systems that could be used that you can integrate. Again, work smarter, not harder, make it as easy as possible, but building in integrations to HR systems is easier than ever.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Mark. You would ask me that. So I think we've covered all the questions. Most of our attendees seem to ask them during the session itself. Again, if you have anything else, we're also a little over time. So just want to remind everyone, if you do have any questions, you can always mail it to us, or, you can reach out to Robin on LinkedIn. She's very active there, or even Twitter. She has a very active Twitter following as well. If you have any questions on the same, you can reach out to her. And do fill in our survey once you're done with this webinar. We'd love to know what you thought about it. If you have any ideas for topics that you'd like to see on our webinar, we'd love to hear it. Thank you so much for attending this. And Robin, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you here. I think, we've all taken back a lot of valuable insights about this whole forest of uncertainty in this timeline that you mentioned. I think there are a lot of great takeaways from the whole thing. Thank you so much for being here again. And I hope to have you again soon, because it was a pleasure hosting you.
It was a good time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for attending. Have a great rest of the day.